Hello, everyone. My name is David Jagno. Once again, I am from Upload VR, and I'm joined by Mike Daly from Insomniac Games. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I've been very excited these past few days, and for good reason.
Yeah, so I guess you're a big fan of VR games, and you guys have worked on a couple, a
Yep.
handful, more than most developers. I would even say.
Yeah.
Obviously, Stormland recently came out. We gave it 4 out of 5 in our review. We're a big fan of the game. We really enjoyed playing it. Co-op was a blast. I think we streamed it shortly after it came out. We're going to do some more streams as well. Really like it. I guess for you, I would be most interested in hearing about sort of Insomniac has been involved in VR since way before the Rift even came out. You guys were working on games like The Unspoken, Edge of Nowhere, Feral Rights, so a lot of VR experience. For you in particular, can you kind of just tell us a little bit about your history in game development and kind of where you got started and what brought you to VR?
Yeah. Sure. I suppose in the beginning, I was like 14 and got to go to like a summer camp that was teaching programming. I'd always loved games, but it wasn't until this really simplistic class that sort of the curtain was peeled back on what what computers could do or just how
Mm,
they worked really.
yeah.
And I really like fell in love with it and basically like went home and started trying to figure out how to make my own games. It was kind of like a caveman learning that you could bang two rocks together, and that's
Yeah.
more or less what I was doing for like the next 10 years.
Oh wow.
Just like
Yeah.
really crude stuff. But I continued basically. I like chased that passion through high school and through college. Got lucky through some connections and started working in the game industry, doing um, exporter tools and then later like engine development as for like a middleware game engine. So it was used in a lot of different games, and I do like support for those studios and expand, make sure that our tool chain sort of worked with what they needed to do,
Oh,
optimized
okay.
the
Okay.
engine for that sort of stuff. And that taught me really good like engineering discipline, but it never really like satisfied me very creatively. So my free time, I kept doing like game jams and hobby projects and just like all sorts of like fun stuff. So eventually that sort of drove me to jump into like developing a game proper. So I became a gameplay programmer. Um, Started working on some fun stuff like procedural generation tools, and started working on weapons programming, which was a real which was super fun. So a few years later, I was looking to move back to my home state of North Carolina, and some of my old colleagues from the engine company, I reached out to them. Coincidentally, they were about to open a gameplay programmer position, so I was like, "Yes, please, I'll take it." So that's how I got started in Insomniac.
Well, there you go, folks. That's how you get a job in the game industry. You just say, "Yep, I'll take it.
Yes, exactly.
One, please. One job, please."
Yep. So I worked for a few years on various Ratchet and Clank titles. So I was doing programming on
Okay.
Full Frontal Assault and Nexus for the PS3. Then I transitioned departments and was the lead designer on Ratchet and Clank for PS4. Um, since Ratchet and Clank, that was around the time we were talking with Oculus about putting together Rift launch titles, and so um, I went from Ratchet to Edge of Nowhere, which was still very early. And at the time, with the platform not developed yet and the hardware not out yet, there was a lot of unknowns and sort of the sky was the limit too. So um, we had a lot to figure out. And the game eventually sort of like formed into Edge of Nowhere from just like ideas all over the place. That game was a lot of fun to work on, but it was at a time where, like, we were still trying to feel out questions like, does everything need to be in first person? How far can you go to support, like, traditional
Oh,
games?
real quick, I just want to say, someone in the chat is saying that we're not taking questions. We are. I am going to read some of these questions people have, but I'm just letting you finish your origin story here. But I do have chat pulled up on a Oculus Dash window, so I'll read some of these questions in just a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, so Edge of
Cool.
Nowhere, that was a gamepad only Rift game. That
Yeah.
wasn't a launch title though, right? It came out after.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
So we were targeting like a launch window, and as that time was approaching, we felt that we would be able to produce the best game by launching. I guess it was the following April. So we were about like 5 months out, and at the time, there were through most of the development, there was no concept of like touch controllers. So we knew we were going to be
Mm,
developing gamepad from the
right.
beginning,
Right.
and part of the whole like theory was um, what does like a traditional action game look like in VR? And that's why we made a game where you sort of like follow this avatar and have sort of running and jumping and climbing controls just to see if it could be done. There was no real examples to
Right.
follow
Right.
when we got started on it. So it felt like we were really like blazing new territory, which was a lot of fun. But kind of anxiety inducing, but it's the sort
Yeah,
of adventure you sign up
and for
for.
and for those unfamiliar, Edge of Nowhere, that to me, I kind of describe it as sort of Tomb Raider meets Lovecraft sort of type of a game. It's action adventure, third person. A lot of climbing, a lot of exploration, a lot of there's some stealth moments in there. And I think one thing in particular that stands out to me in my recollection of it is even though it's a third person game, there's still a great sense of presence because of how large the world feels and the sense of
Hmm.
scale that you guys use. I know there's that one particular moment on the bridge with the giant monster, and you have to really crane your neck up to look. That was one of my first VR experiences where I felt small and insignificant. And I think that was something you guys did really well with that one. And that's those are some philosophies that are carried through into Stormland as well. And
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, absolutely. We made a lot of discoveries in Edge of Nowhere, both about stuff that worked well, like putting you in this awesome setting where you could get a sense of scale and letting you move through it, but also things that don't work, like trying to get you to like pay attention to like this character or thing that's happening when you're
Yeah,
surrounded by
I
this
remember
awesome,
like
beautiful vista.
cutscenes would sort of take control of the camera away from you a little bit, and that was a little jarring. And there was that intro moment where you're actually in first person on the plane, and that was a
Yeah,
little trippy. Then going into third person after that, so I mean, some lessons to be learned. That was early days for VR for sure.
yeah, and there were a lot of discoveries that didn't end up shipping in the game that didn't that didn't work too well either. So we really like got our feet wet, learned a lot of lessons, and as it became time to like produce and finish the game, there were a lot more ideas that we were
Mm.
having and we already had that we didn't really it didn't make sense to start prototyping and to build off of them at that point, because it's we were on a course to finish and give people this cool game to play. So
And
as we were wrapping up. Sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say that I don't want us to get too bogged down talking about your previous game. So I mean, obviously you worked on Edge of Nowhere, and Insomniac's other work, obviously is Unspoken, which is that Magic dueling game. It was a big
Hmm.
esport for a while. Feral Rights, which was like a top-down third-person action game. But a Stormland, that's the new one. That's the big new one, and that one has co-op, and it has amazing traversal mechanics that are just so fast and freeing, but you somehow seem to have avoided a lot of the motion sickness that a lot of other games fall victim to. Well, one of the questions we have here is if you could kind of talk a little bit about how you were able to do that traversal and make it comfortable. I mean, can you give any insights into how that was accomplished?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the collection of a lot of little things, but some of those little things that jump out to me are a lot of our core traversal moves are based off of hand motion rather
Mm,
than like stick motion.
I
So,
see.
climbing is sort of the main one, and we've seen a lot of like climbing in games by now. There's a few things we found that work well for it. One is that we've got sort of this distance tether that lets you climb away from the wall by a few feet. That's nice
Right, right,
because
right.
you get a better sense for your surroundings and you can look around. The motion is a little bit slower, and so you're insulated from any sort of like frame jerkiness or like tracking issues. Um,
Yeah, I know for
and
me in other VR games a lot, if I'm climbing something, it can be frustrating because I won't be looking at my
Hmm.
hand and I go to grab where I think the rock is or whatever. But since it's not real life, I don't have the haptics of feeling the texture of the wall and knowing where my hand is in space. I miss it by like an inch and then I go to pull and I look back and I'm falling. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, that's annoying and that's kind of frustrating. But you guys solve that by, like you said, the tether, your hand can be like this far away and you push grip and then it sort of shoots a little beam to the wall to create the illusion of you grabbing it. So I think that was a good solution.
Yeah, like reliability or meeting players' expectations is definitely like a central theme in designing a game for comfort. And being able to tether when you expect under many different conditions is definitely part of that because you don't want players to suddenly start falling when they don't expect to. So a
Hmm.
super reliable climbing tethering mechanism that doesn't rely on you having to know sort of exactly where the wall is or tell which part of your hand is supposed to be in
And
contact
then
with it or
since you're
whatever.
not directly against the wall, colliding with it, you can fling yourself and you can go up really
Yes.
fast, and that's
Yeah.
so fun to do.
Yeah, and that's one I wish I had some sort of like comfort insight for. But for that, we were just like, okay, well, it makes perfect sense. I want to fling myself or prototyping this, so let's just try it. And then
Uh-huh.
it was one of those like pleasant surprises that it didn't really bother people that much. I mean, in retrospect, I think the theory that guides that is using the motion of your hands to drive your locomotion. That motion has a ripple effect through your body to your head. And so your inner ear, when it's like perfectly stable, is when it's the most sensitive to artificial motion. And when there's this like natural motion sort of rippling through your body, causing it to shift and
Yeah.
move, it sort of dampens it. It's like adding noise to this
And that
signal
that like
of
force
disconnection.
of going like that, people almost move their head a little bit when they do it too. And I think that kind
Exactly.
of helps create that
Yep.
illusion of, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
that's
extra like
fascinating.
physical signal sort of masks the artificial acceleration, and that
Ah.
that helps a lot. Or at least that's my theory. I
Yeah, it
wish we
makes
could do
sense.
like
Yeah.
brain scans and stuff to figure out for sure, but it's just guesses even at this point.
One of the other good questions someone had. This is not really a feature question or like a game design question, but are you guys going to have like the ability to do separate save files or cloud saves or anything like that? Is that something on the roadmap? Because I know one person was saying that they want to show the game to someone, but they don't really want them to have to jump into the end game, on their
Mm.
file or anything like that.
Yeah, so we are turning on cloud saves. I don't know exactly when, but it is a feature that we put in the game.
Okay.
The multiple save files, I'm afraid that your option there is more or less like a workaround, which is just like rename your save file, and so you can sort of bounce back between them freely as you
Oh,
want.
just back it up in a different folder and then yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
that's flexible, but there is a little like friction to going to Discord and figuring out where it is
Okay.
located. And
So one of the other questions someone had is they noticed it seemed like some surfaces weren't climbable.
Mhm.
Is that intentional to kind of funnel players to do certain things?
Not exactly. So like yes, some surfaces are not climbable. We tried to limit those for the purpose of guiding players to the very beginning of the game because
Okay.
that's the part where um, you hadn't really been given the full palette of tools yet, and needing to get through that palette of tools is super important to being able to process the rest of the world. But outside of that starting area, the only time we use non-climbable surfaces is when being able to climb up there is sort of does more harm than good to the user experience, which
Right.
is rare, but some places you just can kind of get your body tangled up in, or we didn't really like detail out all the way.
Yeah, just some sort of video game illusion, tricks to yeah.
Yeah.
One person wants to know. I don't know how much detail you can go into here, but obviously, Insomniac is now owned by Sony, right? So Sony now owns Insomniac.
Hmm.
But so what does that mean for the future of Stormland? Are there any plans for post-launch content? How long? Will you continue cycling the world? Because every Tuesday it resets, and the
Hmm.
in-game content is different. Are there DLC plans? What does the future of Stormland look like? Because I'm sure if a person buys the game, they play it, they love it, but then your studio is owned by a different platform holder that's also involved in VR. What does that look like exactly?
Yeah. Well, so we designed the game sort of knowing that we wanted it to be able to sustain itself without us sort of like constantly like pushing it forward. So to that end, the week to week rollover will happen on its own, basically for like 16 weeks. And after 16 weeks, you'll see it go back to the beginning and you can sort of go through the old layouts. We felt that
Okay,
this was sort of a good trade off in both ways because that is so already so many layouts that you're probably not going to be like, oh my God, it's the exact same thing. Or if you were, you probably felt that feeling just in general throughout the unique layouts that we give you. Um,
sure, yeah,
so there is that sort of automatic mechanism that is in place. As far as updates, we're still working on basically like our patches, which include not just sort of like stability and bug fixes, but also a lot of quality things that we really wanted to get in and we didn't really have time for the launch date. So we're still working on that stuff internally. I'm not really in a good position to speculate on like Sony's plans for like the game or the IP, but I will say that Sony owns the Stormland IP now, so that's fully within their roster, and
interesting.
they can do with that
So does
what they
Sony
want.
also does Sony own the Unspoken, Edge of Nowhere, Feral Rights? So they own all that IP?
Yes, they do. Yep.
Okay. And so theoretically, if they wanted to have you guys make another VR game in the Stormland universe, could they do that, or would they need to get Oculus's permission, or how does that work?
I'm not sure. I think we need to check with our lawyers on that one.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, fair point. Yeah.
I mean, even if sort of it required both parties to work together, nothing is impossible. Sony
Sure.
doesn't have exactly the same like nature of relationship they do to like Microsoft or Nintendo. And I mean,
True. Yeah. I
even
mean,
within those relationships
games like
in
Heavy
these
Rain are on PC now, so I mean,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, in those sort of traditional models we have for predicting like platform holder behavior seem to be at least according to the rumors like not holding true as much as they did in the old days. So
yeah,
who
yeah. It's
knows?
it's pretty wild. I was playing the new Call of Duty Modern Warfare on my PS4 with my friend on his PC. He was on
Hmm,
mouse and keyboard. Crossplay. It was wild, and crossplay has been a thing since VR first came out because Eve Valkyrie has crossplay, Spark has crossplay, Star Trek Bridge Crew has crossplay on PSVR and PC.
hmm.
So the doors are at least cracked to where there is the potential for that kind of stuff. And I guess a follow up to that would be theoretically, let's say Oculus, wanted you guys to work on DLC for Stormland. Is that something they would need? Do you know if that's something that could happen, or does Sony need to like allow that? Or I don't know if you know the flip side of this arrangement.
Well, that would definitely need to be an arrangement between Sony and Oculus.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's kind of up to them to negotiate, and if they can
Gotcha.
work out something that they feel like is mutually beneficial, you know, I'll be here.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Well, can you say whether or not you are working on anything for PSVR or PSVR 2? Is that something you can comment on at all?
Nope.
Yeah, I figured not, but I had to ask. Yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
worth trying. It's too soon. Too soon.
Um,
Working on Stormland patches.
was Sony involved at all in Stormland? Did they have any input into anything? Because that deal happened while you guys were working on it, right?
Um, not really. I mean, we had a pretty good thing going with our publishers at Oculus.
Okay.
Ironically, there was some overlap between uh, those people and people we used to work with at Sony, so that actually felt really
Yeah.
natural.
Okay.
But especially towards the end cycles when the Sony acquisition happened, we really had the product like figured out, and it was just a matter of execution.
And
So there
I'm just gonna
wasn't really that much room.
I'm gonna throw this out there, and obviously, I'm sure plenty of people at Insomniac have thought of this. This isn't an original idea, but of all the people on the planet that I feel like can make a great Spider-Man VR game. Come on, come
Hmm.
on. Well, we
Hmm.
need it. We need it.
Hmm.
The world needs it. Um, let me see. Let's look at some other questions. Kev Gret
Yeah.
says you are great at answering questions, and it's a great interview. So everyone appreciates your transparency.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Um,
I try.
Mike Ward wants to know if there is plans for an Art of Stormland book.
Oh man, that would be cool. If there are plans, um, those are probably not the sort of plans I've been paying attention to lately. So I don't know, but you can ask Vidi on the Insomniac Discord, and he might be able to give you an answer.
Oh, okay, okay. Paradise Decay. We talked about Half-Life VR a little bit earlier, and Mike chimed in a little bit on that. So if you want to watch the beginning, you can see that. But tomorrow we will have a dedicated show for Half-Life VR. And let's see, any other questions here? Uh, Paradise Decay. The same person has a good one. If you had any important or key advice that you could pass on to a budding new VR developer, what would it be?
Hmm. Oh man.
On
So
the
I would
spot. On the
say,
spot.
yeah. I think one of the things a lot of new VR developers underestimate is hand presence. Like, in the same way that people were complaining about sort of the prevalence of teleport mechanics a few years ago, I feel like the next gripe that it's going to be harder and harder to get away without doing is sort of like low resolution fixed pose hands in game. So like my random tip would be um, it's worth the time and budget to have good intuitive, immersive, expressive hands and hand to world interactions. So like, rather than allowing your hands to sort of stay fixed and pass through things or just sort of like be really basic looking, your hands are the heroes of your game. So put a lot of time and attention into making them look good,
That's
to
a
making their
very
poses just right,
interesting. Yeah.
and yeah, and give them context sensitive interactions to anything you think the player might want to interact with. So like, if I wave, it's not quite the same seeing sort of like the rigid default pose as if the game detects a wave and plays, a wave hand gesture or animation. So I would say that's probably one of the things I think that is undervalued currently and is an opportunity to help your game sort of stand out and leave a good first impression on players.
And how does that extend to being relative to like a full body IK? Because with Stormland, obviously you have a fully articulated robot body with arms and all that
Hmm.
kind of stuff. Do you feel like that was a crucial thing as well? Because most VR games just have floating hands or forearms. So I mean, because I know IK is difficult to
Hmm.
do well in VR, but that's something that you guys obviously felt the need to do. Was that driven from an immersion standpoint, or was that because of co-op you need to have the other person animated anyway?
It was both. So
Okay.
when we sort of set our game's pillars, it had both immersion of being as immersive as we could possibly be and embracing presence. And we wanted to make a game that facilitated co-op. So to us, like many things aligned to make the full body avatar make sense. Like, grabbing things from off your body to be inventory instead of having any sort of like menus or items, like having that sense of presence that also reminded you who you were and what you were doing, giving you that feeling of like, oh my gosh, a part of my body is transforming, like that sort of break in immersion to to
Hmm.
to sell the theme. All that stuff sort of aligned, the feeling of like building attachments onto you. That being said, so that was very difficult. It is not. I wouldn't necessarily recommend like a new or budding VR developer take on that
Sure. Yeah.
challenge
Yeah.
because of that difficulty. But I do hope that in the future, um, figuring out where your bones are in the body based off of where your head and hands are is a common problem, like across the industry. So hopefully, a piece of middleware or a platform will solve this problem so that everybody can take advantage of it. That's sort of a best case scenario because it's not like different games are played by people with different bone structures or anything like that.
That's a good point. Yeah. We have a couple other quick questions here. Chris Richardson is curious to know about the jewelry box on the base camp. All this talk about immersion, but you can't pick it up.
Yeah. Yep. That was a no-no. And we went through and flagged certain things. The tricky thing about the jewelry box was that it was placed there on purpose so that you had something to be curious about early and then something to scan once you got the scanner so that you could be like, aha, this
Okay. I
mechanic is
did scan
about,
it, so
yeah,
that works. Yeah.
yeah, it's about like learning more about the world, and we wanted it to be conspicuous enough to be obvious. Um,
Okay.
but then we did realize, like, oh, people are gonna want to grab this. We should do something about it. And we filed a bug, and there were too many bugs, and we were just like, well, maybe this is not the most important bug. But there are a few other places in the game where stuff like that
Sure.
slipped through, and it kind of that was one of my pet peeves. So it bugged me that we didn't get to that.
Okay. One of the other interesting ones here is Joe49000 is curious about subtitles in other languages. Is that something that you guys are looking into?
It is not something we're looking into.
Okay.
We sort of made the hmm, probably shouldn't throw anybody under the bus for this. So I'll just say
Sure,
that
sure.
English is the only language that the game supports, unfortunately.
Okay. Understandable. It's a heavy resource burden to do something like that. That's not simple. And even in VR it's even more complicated. I would imagine to do subtitles and stuff. Um Sampler, he answered some comfort questions earlier, so you can watch back earlier parts of the interview if you want some more insight into comfort. And one other, I guess, well, I'll ask one of these other questions here. This is more of a fun one to end on. Paradise Decay wants to know how many times the development team watched Short Circuit, or Chappie.
Yeah. So those movies were definitely both inspirations. We didn't like
Okay.
hold screenings or anything, but I feel like in my personal childhood, I watched Short Circuit enough to where like I don't need to watch it anymore. It's just ingrained.
Yeah, yeah.
Johnny Five is in there.
Okay, yeah. Or are we gonna get a Nintendo crossover with Wally? Can we get that? Or not Wally?
That
I'm sorry. What was his name? Rob. Rob.
oh yeah.
Yeah, it was the Nintendo one. Wally's Disney. I get my robots confused.
I mean, they both apply. I would say Wally is perhaps more of a direct inspiration in Stormland than
Sure, sure,
Rob,
yeah.
the robotic operated buddy.
Well, you remember the acronym. I didn't remember what it stood for. Okay.
Yeah, that's getting pretty old school.
Yeah, you know your robot lore. I like it. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us here. And sorry this episode went quite a bit longer than most of our other ones, but we had a lot of good discussions, and it was hard to move on. We had a lot of good talks, and I'm glad you were here to join us, and it was great talking with you again. I know we've spoken several times. Hopefully, we'll get to continue to speak if you continue working on VR stuff. I would love to see where Insomniac goes next, in VR and outside of VR. I finished Spider-Man, finished Ratchet and Clank. I'm a big fan of you guys, so keep up the awesome work. And
Awesome.
thank you for joining us here today. And as you exit, you will receive a courtesy plant. Everyone receives a courtesy plant. And
Excellent.
yeah. And so thank you everyone for tuning in. Like we said earlier, Upload VR is going to have a special episode of the VR download again tomorrow, which is a reaction episode where we will discuss Half-Life Alyx, which is the new flagship AAA VR game from Valve. They are detailing it tomorrow at 10 a.m. and immediately afterwards, or hopefully as close to immediately afterwards as we can, we're going to have another episode here in our studio, here on YouTube, and we will put it out as well on podcast platforms if you can't watch it live. But thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you check out uploadvr.com. Check out our other content here on our YouTube channel for all the latest reviews and news. And also on Friday, we're going to have the VR Culture Show, a new episode about the VR Awards here on our YouTube channel. So make sure you check that out. And thank you once again, Mike. It was a pleasure having you. And I am David Jagno, and this is Upload VR on the VR Download. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Do it. All right, bye.